This is a very, very difficult issue, and it's not a problem that's been created by Republicans or Democrats. It's a problem that's been created by Republicans and Democrats. And I think you heard the president's frustration this morning when he said, look, just forget about it. Don't work on immigration right now. Wait till after the election. I think his frustration is that the two parties can't come together to do something that's rational on immigration. What I'd like to see is, number one, we do everything we can to stop illegal immigration. We have to enforce our laws. If we don't have borders, we're not a country. So I think we need to enforce our immigration laws. Secondly, I'd like to see a mandatory e-verify system so that businesses that are willing to hire people who are not here legally and therefore are forced to take lower wages don't have a competitive advantage over companies that are trying to do the right thing and hire people that are here legally. I think a mandatory e-verify would solve that problem. And lastly, I'd like to see our immigration policy change from our legal immigration policy change from one that's based on non-economic factors to one that looks to what we need as a country to staff our workforce, that not only looks to the workers we need to bring in, but also looks to the Americans who need jobs and who need higher wages to try and balance that. I think we're actually getting to a point with the unemployment rate and the availability of employees, you know, with now for the first 2 months in the history of the BLS the government tracking the data, we have more job openings than we have unemployed people. It may be time to try and bring people in legally to fill some of those jobs. But with people flooding across the border with the kind of problems we're seeing, the emotion that this generates, I think Washington's just incapable of coming up with a rational solution, and that's disappointing. This Congress needs to get its act together.
I'm curious, and really genuinely curious, when you were running CKE and hiring lots of workers, many of whom were probably not American-born, how did you check to make sure that they were here legally, or did you? Were you able really to avoid hiring, people who were here illegally?
Well, you know, there is no perfect solution to this problem, but let me give you 2 time periods. Before E-Verify, if people came in with a valid driver's license, a social security number, you would hire them, and it turned out that often those were not legitimate documents. Now, you couldn't tell that until you checked with the Social Security Administration, and that was a long process. So you did sometimes end up hiring people that weren't here legally unintentionally. We had a company policy against that. E-Verify improved that situation materially. I think E-Verify is in the 90 percentile with respect to effectiveness, and that made it much easier for us to determine who was here legally and who was not here legally when we did our hiring. Now, you would hire people before you got the results from E-Verify, but you wouldn't allow them to start work until after the E-Verify information came in. And that was a huge benefit. And I think the more we can do with that system, the easier we can make it for American businesses. And if we make it compulsory so that businesses don't try and take advantage and game the system, I think we could see a real improvement in that area.
Can we talk about the combination of departments, the Department of Education and the Department of Labor wants to roll them up into the Department of Education and Workforce? I mean, I think on one side of the aisle, people are going to be upset. And then on the conservative side of the aisle, I know that there are people who think that there are 5 different cabinet positions that should be completely eliminated and are unnecessary roles for government. What do you make of that move?
Well, look, I think that it's always good to look to improve government inefficiency. I think the federal government is bloated. We have an administrative state, really a 4th branch of government that's gotten so big it's beyond control. This administration has made great progress economically by reducing regulation, reducing the size of government, and there's nothing wrong with looking at the Department of Labor and the Department of Education to try and combine programs, particularly with workforce development and career education. We've got programs on both sides. If we could combine them. I'm sorry?
Is that a role for the federal government?
Is which a role for the federal government?
Workforce training, re-education of citizens. I mean, there's so many federal programs. You were just talking about it, but a lot of conservatives would argue that shouldn't be done by the federal government at all.
Well, you could have effective programs that help the private sector. You know, really job training should be done in the private sector, but there's nothing wrong with having public education cover, for example, skills training as opposed to just preparing people for a liberal arts education. You could have programs at various levels of our education structure that would actually prepare people who wanted to go right into the workforce to go into the workforce. And the government can have a role in that. I think the problem right now is you have programs in the Department of Education and the Department of Labor that duplicate each other. You have skill sets in both departments. If you could combine the skill sets and reduce the inefficiencies and the cost of those programs, that could be a benefit for American workers and could help the private sector. As Secretary of Labor, one of the things I wanted to do was to work closely with the private sector on jobs training. They know where the jobs are. They know the people they need. They know the skills they need. I think the government could make great strides if it tried to work more with the private sector in that respect.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.